Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. This week, we have 5 new reviews for you folks here. 4 from me, 1 from contributor Ian Mitchell. For me, we're going to have 4 reviews, including No Mistakes, The World of Change, book number 1. Also, this week, we're going to review The Destroying Plague, Disgardium, book number 3. Also, 7 days later, a post-apocalyptic Gamelit survival horror. And last, the press start system discovery. We'll have 1 recommendation from Ian Mitchell from Ian's Picks of the Week. But before we get into any of that, of course, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we don't actually have a lot this week. It's been a relatively quiet week in the news category, I should say. Just for a quick reminder from Jeffrey Falcon Lowe, the deadline for the submissions for Dungeon Anthology Part Number 2 is coming up. It's actually going to be January 24th of this year. So if you are interested in submitting a short story between 2 and 20,000 words to that to that anthology, please make sure you get that in. We have details in the show notes for where you can send it to dungeonanthology@gmail.com. And of course, the link to the actual requirements for your short story should be dungeon based. It's a dungeon anthology. But I actually overall liked the last one from Jeffrey Falcon Lowe and the authors that contributed within specials. Enjoyable Nugget from Ray Johnson. But there you go. That's your LitRPG news on the stuff that's coming out, that's out now. We actually don't have as many ebooks out this week that are new and published as new audiobooks. So yay for audiobooks, I guess. In the out now, just stuff I've come out. Haven't had a chance to read though. Ghoul Empire Rust, a dark fantasy LitRPG. We have the second book in the Civ CEO series, a 4X lit series, the Accidental Champion. Ian Mitchell reviewed this. He really enjoyed it, I believe. So yay. I've read portions of it and I've liked it, just haven't gotten through it, unfortunately. But book 2 is out. A lot of people really enjoyed book 1. Also out now is Realms at War, the Virtual Realms, book number 3. Each one of these covers is super different. So check to see if you've read book 1 and 2. Like I honestly, when it was first, I'm like, have I read this? The author's name sounded familiar, but that was kind of it. And when I looked it up, I'm like, oh, I've actually read book number 1 and I liked it. So definitely go check out book number 2 or 3 if you've looked at it. Also out now is the System Apocalypse issue number 3 from Tao Wong and JC Grande. This is the comic book version of the System Apocalypse. So this has definitely been a very interesting project for the author. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him at a recent convention. But I'm also super happy that successful authors are branching out in different mediums. So instead of just ebooks and audiobooks, which are wonderful, this is a different kind of visual storytelling, which is I'm always happy to see our authors expanding, experimenting, to see what works, what doesn't. And so this is into the 3rd issue, which is the longest LitRPG comic book, I should say. Developed by an American author. There's a lot of qualifiers here, but I've enjoyed reading them, so definitely go check that out. Also out now is the 3rd book in the Gloominess series, Gloominess Plus 3. If you enjoyed the series, book 3 is out. And new also is The Blade, A Girl Named Guillotine. So new stuff. In audiobooks, again, much longer list here. We have the 2nd book in the Ether Collapse series, Excise. The 3rd book in the Galacticon series is out as an audiobook, A Check for a Billion. The 4th book in the Dungeon World series by Jonathan Brooks. That's on this well-loved series by readers. I've only got 2 book 1. Not that I didn't enjoy the series. I really did. I just get busy. But all the people I've talked to have really enjoyed it. If you like dungeon core stuff. The 3rd book in the Illusionist series, which is the Viridian Gay Alliance spin-off series, is out as an audiobook. So go check that out. One of the few spin-off series for that universe that I actually liked and I enjoyed. And that's because it's set before such a long time, the main VGO series. It can do its own thing. Street Cultivation by Sarah Lynn, who is one of my top new Liberty authors of 2018 and 19. Street Cultivation is out as an audiobook. Well Done, Small Medium, book number 3 for Andrew Sipple, who's the author of the Threadbare series, and this is set in that universe. It's different characters. You get a few crossovers, but this is the same LitRPG rules, but again, not the same Threadbare characters. Just different storytelling, but still very enjoyable. I actually really like the series. Legends Online, book number 1, Genesis, is out as an audiobook. The second book in the Jin Tamer, I always say this wrong. The Jin Tamer series is out as an audiobook. I think book 2 actually is definitely better than book 1. It's definitely less stark, and it kind of hits that Pokemon gotta catch them all vibe a little better. So definitely go check that out. Dungeons of Strata is out as an audiobook. And this is actually kind of a slightly weird situation in that it's produced, I think, by Audible. Because that's what it says in the thing. I know it's the actual ebook is produced by Portal Books. Dungeons and Strata is actually out now as an audiobook. The ebook is apparently not going to come out until the 20th, according to the most recent information from the author. They might push that out a little earlier now that the audiobook is actually out first. But this is one of the weird things where the audiobook came out first before the ebook is. So there you go. In upcoming LitRPG, Dungeons and Strata Deepest Dungeon Book 1, scheduled for a January 20th release. 7 days later, book 2, we're reviewing book 1. Book 2 is going to be out on January 23rd. Hero Online book number 4 will be out on January 24th. January 20th, it'll be Reading It Online Dark Siege, which I believe is the last book in the VGO series. January 29th, it'll be Guard, Web of Worlds Empire. January 31st, Endless Online Fantasy, The Elk Kingdom, which is the second book in that series. January 31st, this is a new addition to the upcoming list. It'll be Tuscan Blade, Exodus Online, book number 1, written by Lavelle Jackson, who's another LitRPG reviewer who publishes also his LitRPG reviews on YouTube. So definitely go check out his channel. And looking forward to reading his book. On January 31st, it'll be Legends Online, book number 4. On February the 4th, Battlemaster of the Blood Crown, book number 1. On February the 4th, the second book in the Last Time Loop series, which definitely took some turns that I didn't expect. Reading the cover art and looking at the cover and reading the novel description. So I actually liked book number 1. So I'm looking forward to reading book number 2 in February. February the 6th, Skulls and Thrones, the Bad Guy series, book number 3. February the 7th, The Dark Academy Transformation, book number 4 in this series. Curious to see where this is going. February the 10th is the second book in the Invasion series, An Equation with One Unknown. On February the 13th is the second book in the World of Karik series, The Art of Deception. And February the 14th, it'll be The Second Betrayal, A Fantasy Liberty Adventure Divine Apostasy, book number 2. Again, this is one of the things where the cover art from book 1 and 2 aren't really connected in either of the titles. This is actually a sequel to Shade's First Rule, which is a book you might have read. That's the title I'm kind of associating more. I had to look it up because the author's name is very catchy, AFK. And I recognized it, but I didn't connect it to the original first book. So if you read Shade's First Rule, this is the sequel. It'll be out on February the 14th of 2020, not 2019. Also on February 29th, it'll be Gods of Ash and Amber, the fourth book in the Seeds of Chaos series. March the 9th, it'll be the Incarnator, Project Stellar book number 1. Third book in the Underdog series will be out on March the 20th. The third book in the Gloria Formation Empire series will be out on February 29th of 2020. March the 30th, it'll be Quest for Freedom, the fifth book in the Hero Online series. April the 2nd, it'll be Eastbound and Down, the eighth book in the Good Guy series. April the 15th, it'll be the fifth book in the Dragonheart series called Sea of Sorrow. The author for this series sometimes would just drop these early, I guess. So just be aware that this might pop early, and I might not notice it. On May the 1st, the farthest we're going out in our upcoming list is the fourth book in the Alchemy Online series by James Cyrus Baldwin called Warsinger. So one of the few Dragon Rider series with LitRPG, so enjoyable series. Looking forward to reading it in May. And that's it for all the upcoming stuff. On to new releases and reviews. And first up this week is No Mistakes, World of the Changed, book number 1, written by Vasily Mahenko. He's the author who wrote the Way the Shaman series, Galacticon, and a bunch of other stuff you might have read. He's a Russian translated author. This is 321 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Let's go. A new ultra-modern mobile game, and the release is just 2 days away. Be the best. Save the planet. Who's going to fight back the monster invasion if you don't? Pre-release already available. No text alerts or payments required. World of Change, complete modified human consciousness. The incredible graphics that worked even on the simplest of phones. The intuitive interface that made the game accessible for absolutely anyone. The aggressive marketing campaign that put news about the game on every TV, every phone, every tablet. By the time the launch was a few days away, the entire army of fans was out there waiting for just one thing, Our X. That was what the mysterious developer calling the release time. But did anyone actually have a clue what Our X would unleash on them? Were they ready to pay the price the game demanded? Mark Durin, a student, was just one of many to have no idea what kind of fate awaited him in the game. All they cared about was jumping into the pre-release and as soon as it came out. So there we go. That's actually fairly understated as far as a novel description goes. Full disclosure, I received my copy review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is a Russian translated apocalypse LitRPG story written again by the Way the Shaman author, Vasily Mahenko. Now, unlike that story, no one is trapped into VR game here. Instead, the RPG apocalypse comes to Earth via some bad aliens and an imposed RPG interface. Not through one's like physical cortex, but through their phones. So that's kind of the hook as far as game mechanics that makes this different than other LitRPG stories. Humans have to play this new game, but it's very much an RPG apocalypse kind of story on Earth. There are mutated monsters to kill. Leveling up has to be done, the big emphasis here is definitely on the brutal RPG apocalypse story here. The story itself can get pretty dark and brutal, with many characters getting killed off, which I actually thought was nice, and it has some very nice realized stakes of seriously secondary characters that you kind of liked or not liked, but a lot of times what you do like, oh, they die, and I'm like, oh, that's definitely a serious choice that the author did. Let's see. The story is a bit slice of life as the main character follows. You follow the main character to learn all the new rules of this new world, or the game imposed world, and he does whatever it takes to survive and try to find and help his sister. The threats come not just from monsters, though. People can be just as deadly, and there are many mysterious enemies to mankind, all of which the author and the main character, of course, go through and discover and deal with. And again, I like some of the story twists. You can tell that the author is very seasoned in his writing and in keeping things interesting. This is the same guy who wrote, I think it's 11 books in the Way of Shaman series, with fans who are devoted to it because the story shifted and it changed tones and it changed emphasis and scale as it went on. And so you can definitely see that experience in this particular novel, and that the author goes from a small story to something a little bigger and grander and you can tell he's planning and setting up stuff for future stories. There are a few things story-wise that I was like, oh, those are interesting choices, but they were definitely developed as like this slice, right? And you can see that there are a few things that were like, as the story was being written, it's like, oh, the author kind of put some things to the side to pick up later, or maybe develop in second books. But the story was always interesting for one reason, whether it was the developed game system, the RPG mechanics, and again, we'll get into that in a second as far as details, or just like the seriously sometimes very brutal and graphic nature of the RPG apocalypse, and the author definitely captures that aspect of like the zombie apocalypse stuff and brutality and that kind of nature, although these aren't necessarily zombies, and I like that. So it's interesting for me the entire way through to the story. Game mechanic wise, things are really rather detailed. There are new mechanics that differ from the author's other series, of course. Levels are gained not from killing necessarily, but from completing system-generated missions and finding caches of weapons or rare items. Coins are given for taking the first picture of kills, whether human or monsters. Coins are used to buy weapons and power packs to run them, stat upgrades, skill upgrades, regeneration packs, shields to protect from damage. Lots of good upgrades from item stats, and the tech keep the story from getting repetitive and make the main character feel more and more powerful as the story goes on. This definitely develops into an overpowered main character story, but it still stays interesting because the challenges also develop as well. Overall, this is a good, entertaining LitRPG with a brutal main character that is willing to do whatever it takes to survive the RPG apocalypse. I liked it. Given a score of 7.6 out of 10. That's no mistakes. World of the Changed LitRPG series with a score of 7.6 out of 10. I had a good time with it. And next we have The Destroying Plague Disgardium book number 3, written by Dan Sirkulanoff. It is 393 pages, $6.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Having emerged from the sandbox into the wide world of Disgardium, Sith and his friends find themselves under the watchful eye of the Preventers, the strongest clan in the world, hunt not only Sith, but also the already discovered threat, Crag, a new member of the Awoken clan. But this is just one of the many problems. The sleeping god has another impossible quest for him. The old enemy Big Poe thirsts for vengeance, and the nucleus of the Destroying Plague prepares to take cruel revenge against the former herald. Okay, some of that you're probably not going to understand unless you read books 1 and 2. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is the third book in the semi-dystopian fantasy liberty story where the main character gets some rather overpowered abilities, and I'm still enjoying it. And that's not always the case with some of these overpowered main character stories. Sometimes it's really hard to continue on challenge the main characters when they have OP powers. Thankfully, the story still has actually put the main character back into position of a villain in the slice of life story, which I think provides more opportunities for interesting storytelling. There is also an increased threat to the main character in real life, as some of his friends, as they're released from that sheltered safe zone into the larger sandbox world, which is good, which is good for the storytelling. Makes for some very interesting adventures, but also allows for some new threats to them, including higher powered guilds who are handling the threats, which is an established mechanic in the story. So some interesting stuff here. It's good. I always like this series because it's really kind of casual reading for me, which is rare. I enjoy the series. I can just kind of sit back and chill out and relax without having to worry about like taking copious notes for new game mechanics or anything, because I know I like the characters. I like this kind of slice of life fantasy adventure story. And I know the storytelling is always going to be interesting. Dan Sirkulanoff is a good writer. I've enjoyed just everything he's written that's LitRPG. And so it's always entertaining for me. So for me, it gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. That's The Destroying Plague Disgardium book number 3 with a score of 7.7 out of 10. Okay, next we have 7 Days Later, a post-apocalyptic game lit survivor horror written by Riley Morrison. It is 343 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Craft, build, search for loot, and find and fight to survive in a vast post-apocalyptic game world. It's been 7 days since the old world fell, and now my girlfriend's sayonara, and I must battle for our survival. We'll harvest wood, mine metal, grow our own food, and craft better equipment. Then we build our base, secure it with traps, fortified walls, and defend it till the end. The monsters that ended the old world are out there, hunting the night and gathering into hordes that will attack us once a week. But zombies and mutants are not the only threat. From mysterious enemy NPC factions to hostile player bandits and ravenous packs of wild animals, the open world of 7 Days Later is filled with danger. Only by working together can sayonara, and I hope to live through the horror. but are we ruthless enough to survive? Grab your guns, tools, and upgrades and enter the apocalypse. So there you go. Full disclosure, I received advanced copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This story I don't think really worked for me specifically, and I'll get into why. It's inspired by survival games, which I'm actually a fan of survival games. The game mechanics and story have crafting, food, water, sleep meters that need to be kept up, and there are a wide variety of monsters and people to fight and survive. So I think the core, I think one of the things that the author really did well was stay faithful to the survival game mechanics. He maybe for me at least, too much to a detailed degree. There are the actual base building elements here, with homes being built as well and traps defended. And the character progression on the mechanic side is based on equipment, so there aren't traditional levels per se. There are crafting and item equipment progression, and that's not uncommon in survival RPG, like survival game, apocalypse games. But that's the kind of progression here. So you're not necessarily going to have like straightforward, like kill a bunch of monsters, get the level kind of stuff. It's make and craft your own equipment, harvest resources from monsters and things you scavenge, and that's the progression that you get as you build your bases and your traps. You're going to get more powerful based upon your equipment and your actual skill as a player. But there is progression because it does ramp up from super simple tools to more progressively more powerful things as you grab more resources and whatnot and fight tougher enemies. Now, again, the game mechanics are probably the thing I like the most about the story, and that they're very faithful to a specific game here. The author is very open about saying he loves survival horror games and he loves these apocalypse games. In particular, he was inspired by the hundreds of hours he's devoted to 7 Days to Die, which is a specific game. And I haven't played that game, so it's hard for me to kind of judge, but I'm guessing that he pulls a lot of the mechanics and from those experiences there. And for me, while I appreciated the faithfulness to it, for me, the crafting in particular was a little lackluster. And that's mostly just because it was very button pushing in that they gather resources and they already have established list of crafting recipes. And so there really wasn't like a sense of discovery as they explored the game world. In addition to that, character wise, there wasn't really a sense of a real threat in this. And that's one of those, for me at least, defining characteristics of what I like so much about like these survival apocalypse stories, and that the characters feel like they could die any moment permanently, and there's a consequence, there's a serious threat, and there's serious stakes to them surviving or not, right? And that's more of a storytelling element, and it took me a while to figure out how to kind of phrase this, in that this story is so faithful to like this particular game system. It feels like you're watching somebody play that particular game. And that for you as a reader, that might be super amazing. It really would. If you're a fan of 7 Days to Die, I think you'll like this a lot. For me though, I was hoping for more of a speculative storytelling, in that going beyond what currently exists, like making the crafting better, making the monsters and the adventures a little more narratively interesting. And instead, it really just kind of feels like you're watching somebody play a particular game. And if you're a fan of the game, you're going to have a great time with this. I haven't played the game though, so I don't have that same connection to that particular. I didn't have that same connection to that particular story. Eventually, that changes a little bit in the story, in that there are more insidious horror elements that pop up in the novel, but it still very much felt that way. So for me, there really didn't. I found myself not be as interested in it because, again, they didn't feel like there were heavy stakes. Because again, there's no permadeath. You restart your characters, and you have some stat losses. There's some other penalties that are incorporated in the story. But if you don't survive, if you become a monster, it's like, oh, okay, I'll just start an different server. I'll start a new character in the same server. And there are other elements of like, oh, it's painful to die, but that's kind of it. For most of the story, I'm not going to spoil things for people, and that does shift a little bit. And because the characters in the story are already super fans of like this kind of game, they already kind of knew what to do in the story. They kind of knew based on their, even if they don't know the specific mechanics in the story, they knew how to survive. They knew some of the challenges and how to prepare for them. And so there really wasn't even a kind of sense of discovery of the mechanics as the characters went through the gameplay on this game. But again, like I said, all the actual game elements, super detailed, super crunchy, lots of numbers, lots of stuff there. And so if you're super okay with that, I was definitely pleased with the level of detail that the author put into like the actual, crafting and mechanics and stuff. That's all super pleasing. And like I said, the crafting itself, which is a huge part of the story, kind of came off okay to me, not because of the lack of detail, just because that it didn't go beyond like the button pressing, like, oh, I have enough wood and I have enough stone, and magically now I have a stone axe. So like there's just like that element of like, oh, a lack of like describing skills of like actually putting things together, which is what I actually like about crafting. I like to see the actual putting together, because it makes me feel like I'm an inventor or I'm doing it or something, which is kind of a draw. I like that aspect of crafting, and that just kind of was missing here, because very kind of button pressing, like I have the resource I need, press the button, it appears, so that didn't work for me. The story itself kind of slice of life with hints at a deeper secret in the game. Again, crafting and base building are important to the story. It wasn't interesting for me to read about because, again, of the issues I mentioned already, combined with the real lack of stakes in the story and the kind of forced horror ending, which didn't really make sense to me, and it kind of negates some of the other earlier points in the story. The story overall just didn't work for me. And again, that's just me. Nothing negative to say about the actual storytelling. On the technical side, nicely done. However, if you like the game 7 Days to Die, you're probably going to like this more than me. And it's, like I said, the author seems to draw a lot from his experiences with playing that game, for better or worse. So for me, it didn't really work, but I think it might work for readers who enjoy that particular game or similar specific kinds of games like that. So that's 7 Days, a post-apocalyptic game survival horror story with a score of 6 out of 10. And up next, we have Press Start's System Discovered, book number 1, written by Thomas Whipple. It is 167 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Dean Parker likes to play classic video games. When he found his old console from when he was a kid, he dusts it off and sets it up. He played his old games, but he finished them all long ago. So what does he do? He takes a trip to the local game shop to browse the used titles. Browsing the old cartridges, he finds one that he never heard of, Dark Ages, The Death of Magic. When his store attendant tells him that the game is rumored to never have been beaten, he had to have it. Occupying all his free time, he finally beats the unbeatable game. What happens next? He never would have guessed. He is introduced to the system, something that he's always existed, but not everyone knew about. Join Dean as he introduced to the seedy underbelly of a world where the myths of magic from the past read like history. Joined by his childhood friend, he must survive in a world of magic hidden from everyone, a world that has remained secret throughout the blood of those who discovered it. And to top it off, he discovers that his childhood friend, his best friend, isn't even human. Okay, that's all accurate. However, I will note that novel description is easier to read than the novel sometimes, and I'll get into that. Okay, first of all, read it with salt. This novel seems like it's a work of fan fiction or a work from a LitRPG enthusiast, which is totally cool. Just be aware that sometimes it means that on the technical writing side, things are less polished. And that's perfectly cool. Everybody starts the writing process and careers at different points and different levels of experience. But that might be an issue for some people. There aren't a ton of technical writing issues, but there are some that are consistent choices that didn't bother me personally, but I know that they're going to bother other readers, and I'll get into what those are later. Okay, the story itself, fairly slice of life, and it actually feels a little longer than what the page count says. I actually liked the first 5%. There's a really good opening on this. It gets the main character into this kind of RPG game world situation. But what I really liked about it is the fact that it really nailed like this old school gamer vibe, and it felt the most genuine. It felt the most like fleshed out from experience, like this kind of like almost monotonous stuff. Like you're so into this video game that you just can't put it down, and the old school 8-bit graphics and the enthusiasm of just like looking at this like kind of crappy like overhead 8-bit like screen system compared to now. At the time it was top line, obviously. But the author definitely got that gamer vibe set, which kind of invested me in the story, which is so good. After that 80%, the story does shift though. It shifts into this real life RPG story with the main character becoming part of the system, and where essentially is a magical system overlaying our world, where that's hidden from normal people, where they're magical creatures and humans and who have magical powers. And it's more of this urban fantasy RPG thing that's going on there. So I like a lot of urban fantasy stories, like, oh, all the magic creatures and all the magic people, they've existed here this whole time. And we haven't seen them or noticed them because of some whatever quirk. In this case, the system. So there you go. That's kind of the setup for the story, which isn't bad. It's an interesting way to kind of do urban fantasy. And it kind of works in this particular case. The early part of the story is definitely the most awkward, and it's going to be the hardest for people to get through, I think. And I thought when I read it, I was like, oh, this definitely feels like it's written from a fan or from a LitRPG enthusiast. And as the story progresses, you can see the author just becomes more comfortable with the writing style, with the world building. They kind of find their way a little bit in their voice. So again, just read the story with a grain of salt. That's what this is essentially. The early part of the story, again, feels the most awkward as it tries to set up the magic and the game mechanic system, and dialogue. I think dialogue is probably the weakest part of the storytelling, on a technical writing side. One, because sometimes there's a definite lack of dialogue tags, which is okay when there's just like one person talking, but when there are three people, it's like, oh, wait, who's actually saying this? And it's a little hard sometimes to kind of figure it out. It doesn't ruin the story. It's just like, oh, it's just not as clear. So when I just have to think about who's talking or who's like having this interaction, it kind of takes it out of the moment. Sometimes, this, again, like all the other writing stuff, improves as the story goes on. Just be aware of it. The mid to late story, I think, is probably the better written and developed sections of it, because you get a little more action. The magic system is established, and so it's just kind of progressing on its own way. And there were some actually interesting little nuggets of world building that happen along the way. But again, it's the first part is going to be a little hard to get through for some people. Talking more specifically about some of the technical writing issues, the story is written in third-person present tense, which might be an issue for some people because it's third person, some people because it's written in present tense. So unlike the actual novel description, it's written in the now. It's not written in the past tense. Again, a few of their small things. Sometimes it's kind of a lack of dialogue tags, and the dialogue in the actual writing sometimes is a little awkward. Again, and it's something that does improve as the story continues on, but in the beginning, it might be a turnoff for some people. And again, if you can get past that early section, which is not terrible, it really is a lot of like game mechanics description and training stuff. I actually like the training stuff. But the writing style is a little awkward. And part of that is the fact that it is third person present tense. And some of it is just, somebody finding the writing style. After that, though, it does become something interesting in that it's an urban fantasy RPG kind of system thing. Okay, on the game mechanics side, nothing that's particularly unique. You get D&D kind of stats, you get mana, health, etc. So anybody who read LitRPG is going to be familiar with that system. I don't think the author really needed to define everything as detailed as he did, but I get that everybody that makes those choices. The only unique thing here is the fact that the actual RPG progression is based not on killing things, but instead on raising skills. And which are contributing to your overall level. So skill level increases. So going from skill level 1 to 2 in gardening, we'll give you 1 experience point. We'll give you 1 experience point for getting first level, give you 2 experience for getting the second level, and etc. And so as you experience points accumulate, the character's overall actual level that affects their health and mana and gives them stat points and free skill slots goes up. So there you go. So that's kind of the only kind of twist there. And one of the things that it kind of makes the story lean a little more toward urban fantasy, though, is the magic system. And I actually like the magic. So I like the neat ideas the author did with it. I like some of the interesting spells and skills that the author incorporates into the story. Especially like the D animation. I'm like, oh, that's better than the other one. Was kind of neat little twist. And that was the thing that kept me interested in the story long enough for the story to get better. But it kind of leans towards the urban fantasy side of things. There are skill points associated with it, and there is an RPG progression that tracks the increase in it as it gets better. But the actual description of the magic system as the main character trains in the first quarter of the novel feels a little more, urban fantasy. So just be aware of that. Overall, again, despite some of the technical writing issues, I like the story. But again, my brain can ignore those things and still enjoy stories. Not everybody can. Like I said, this feels like an enthusiast story. Somebody who likes LitRPG, who likes storytelling, but may not be obviously professional at it yet. But they put something out, and I can definitely appreciate that as somebody who essentially did the same thing. And so my brain can overlook that kind of stuff. And eventually, late story, the story does improve to a level. I was like, oh, I'm entertained beyond the interesting magic system, right? But again, there were challenges, and just be aware that we're reading this. Overall, I liked the story. It was more entertaining than not, and eventually late story, there is some role development. The dialogue gets better, the storytelling gets better, and I appreciated more about it than just like the magic system that on its own merits was interesting enough to keep me going, keep me turning pages. However, I'm not sure I'd read a second book in this series, but book 1 was entertaining enough. So for me, it scores 7.1 out of 10. That's Press Start, System Discovered, book number 1, with the score of 7.1 out of 10. And next up, we have Ian's Picks of the Week. I keep forgetting to make a graphic for this. This is the section of the podcast where contributor Ian Mitchell, a longtime LitRPG community member, reads and reviews just about as much as me. He's nice enough every week, or when he can, to contribute his reviews of LitRPG stories and Gamelit stories. He actually includes more Gamelit than I do. And this week he just has one review. Life happened, but I always appreciate all the things he can add to the show, because again, his viewpoints and his what he appreciates are slightly different than mine, which is always nice to get different perspectives. So this week he's actually contributed the review for How to Be an Adventurer, World of Gimok, written by Damian Hansen. And the author himself actually describes this as being D&D inspired. I don't think he actually calls it LitRPG himself. He calls it a little more Gamelit, but perfectly simple. Ian likes it. I trust his opinion and his reviews on things. And this is what he says about this particular novel. He says, the book is similar to Caverns and Creatures series. I have difficulty getting jokes, and that got in my way this time. The writing was fine. The table that gamer group transported into the game thing worked. This one was hard for me to evaluate. Pretty sure other readers would find it funny. And he gives it a score of 7.0 out of 10. Now, to be super clear about this, Ian's review scores are usually about a point higher than mine for the same stuff that we've read. He's a little more generous, I think, that I am on the review score side of things. So just take that into note when he's talking about the story. The humor issue was for him in particular, made it challenging to evaluate. I love Caverns and Creatures. I don't know that this story is has the same kind of humor. That particular series, Caverns and Creatures, has potty humor, lots of cursing, lots of penis jokes. I don't know if that exists here, but a lot of other tabletop stories have also tried to incorporate it, so be aware of that. But Ein gives this a 7.0 out of 10 for How to Be an Adventurer, World of Grimrock, and that's the only review he gave us this week. There we go, folks. That's it for us. That's the end of the show and the podcast this week. Thanks a lot for listening. Thank you very much for watching and taking the time to let us be a part of your lives this week, for helping us to support us when you watch us, when you click on the links we have in our show notes and you purchase the stories that we recommended, or we enjoyed, or don't. That helps to support the podcast. Amazon throws us a couple pennies every time you buy a book using one of our links. So just be aware of that. You can help follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, on our webpage. And if you want to find out other ways to keep the podcast free, help support us and cover the cost of doing a podcast on LitRPG, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, thanks for hanging out with me today. I always have a good time with you guys. It's always a highlight of my week to do this, even though I'm like a lot of people, busy with life, busy with family, busy with job stuff. It's always fun. It's always enjoyable to talk to you and to see you and to talk about this thing that I love, LitRPG. And until we can hang it again, folks, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.